see.
Mhm.
Hi, parents. Hi, everyone. Welcome. Today, it's a very flexible, this is for you. It's your event. It's a Q&A. So we're going to pick up questions that you have for us. There's no particular topic that we set today. We don't have a set of questions prepared. So it's up to you to bring it to us. So anyway, my name is Petra Dieter from Victim to Hero Institute, and we have the honor to have with us Dr. Jennifer Harmon from Colorado State University. If you guys are not familiar with Dr. Harmon, you are in for a treat. I mean, she's amazing. She's like really one of the top researcher in the field of parental alienation, and she's really the one that leading her research is actually really it's groundbreaking in the way that it show us for the first time that we can recognize that parental alienation is a form of domestic violence and child abuse. And so her work is so important in this field, and she's done so much work, not just in research, but also she's also does a lot of work as a expert witness in different cases as well. So she has experience in the field as well. Dr. Harmon, thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks. It's good to be back.
Thank you. I hope you have a glass of wine or a beer or something, because we're just going to be chilling here. I don't really have a set of questions. Hi, Claudia. Thank you. Fernando, hi. Stacy, hi. Thank you so much. Stacy said, thank you for your research. Claudia said, this is so awesome. And Fernando said, do you take cases in California?
I do cases all over the country and Canada. But I do it on the side, so my time is super limited. I try to help when I can, but as a professor, I can only do so much with my free time. So, but I have taken cases, I think in about 12 states now. So yeah.
Right. So yeah, since she's not doing much, you guys, like just research and teaching, and as a mom, as a wife, as a, and her life and everything else. So yeah, and on top of that, cases. And I think one of the kind of sort of benefit of the pandemic is actually people are a little bit more open to the concept of doing things remotely, right?
Yeah.
With Zooms.
Yeah, that's allowed me to testify in a lot more cases, because the time it takes to travel, I mean, that would take up 2 days, sometimes 3, and that's a lot of time to pay somebody as well, so that's allowed me to testify in a lot more cases over the last 2 years, more than I would have probably normally.
Right, exactly. And so yeah, it's really also helping parents in terms of the cost as well. It's cheaper as well.
Yep.
So Claudia said, I have wine. Oh, thank you. We need wine. I should have a glass of wine, but anyway,
Yeah, I
I
just
have
have a
water.
soda with, I should have poured a wine.
Exactly. Today should be a just chilling day. Okay, Cindy, hi. Louis, hi. Predax said, hi, Petra. I read some of Dr. Harmon papers from recent year. I even submitted some of the exhibits in my custody case. Also, they were disallowed as hearsay. I assume that is because Dr. Harmon is not there for people to examine her.
Right. Yeah, they usually, even if you try to submit a police report, they won't do it unless you have the police officer there to talk about it, which is.
Yeah, I'm actually shocked. I actually didn't know this. I really thought that if you have like something solid like a police report, I mean, like, come on, this is an official document, the
Right.
police report. I mean, how could you argue? And yeah, sometimes they don't even allow it because of hearsay. They're saying, I'm going like,
Right.
how could you have even better evidence as a police report? But yes,
Right.
yeah,
And I find, that it probably, I mean, I'm not an attorney, and I'll never pretend to be. I know there's a lot of attorneys who pretend to be scientists, but I won't go there. But I don't know the rules, all the rules of evidence. I know a little bit, but I think it's sometimes you'll have an attorney who pushes a very strict interpretation of the hearsay rule, and other attorneys don't. So I think it depends on the court, depends on, where you're at. Yeah.
right. Okay, so let's see. We have Stacy have water. Good.
Mhm.
Very healthy. But I said, I wonder if Dr. Harmon, actually, before I go into that, so he or she said that, he or she read your papers. I have to say that, gosh, your papers are just so heavyweight. Like every time I read your paper, like literally, I have to sit, I have to block out. It's intense. Like if you guys ever read her papers, especially like the one about domestic violence and child abuse, and then you have a new one recently about Dr. Matheson and I call it the onion. Uh, it's about the losses, different kind of losses that the alienated child experience. So it's like a different layer of it, from
Mhm.
losing the cognitive ability to losing their childhood and innocence and all all these layers. Yeah, her papers, guys, are just intense, and that's when you see how deep the research goes because the level of um scientific research, the background that has been done on it, the literature review that's been done on it, and also the analysis of it and things like that, and different kind. And you like to pull different models from different field to draw parallel to things.
Mhm.
So yeah, so it's really deep. Um, okay, so Predaxa, I wonder if Dr. Hammond could be an expert witness should I get a retrial. I'm also preparing to go to appeal, then Supreme Court, and ultimately federal court. There's a move away evaluation being ordered, but I want to make sure that the evaluator is familiar with alienation. Worst case scenario, I would like to have an expert on my side ready to help.
So, yeah, I mean, I must get at least 15 emails a week, asking for help. And a lot of it is timing and what's happening at different stages of the case. And sometimes my type of testimony wouldn't necessarily be useful. I think it depends. I've been on cases where multiple mental health people have figured out alienation was going on. And so they didn't really necessarily need someone like me to educate the court. They just needed information on best practices for intervention, and so I think the role, and that doesn't always have to be someone like me. It could also, there's other people who could do that too. I don't do case specific research or testimony, meaning I don't comment on or give opinions on specific cases or details of cases. So I mostly just serve as just somebody who educates the court on the research. And there's been so many scientific advances over the last few years even. And so I think just to update the court, on what we know is important. And that doesn't have to be with somebody like me, but I tell everybody to get 2 books who are considering an expert witness. One of them is the book by Ashish Joshi. I think you've seen it. It's called Litigating Parental Alienation. And then the other book is co-edited by Lorandos and Burnett. It was published in 2020, called Parental Alienation, Science and Law. And those books, I think, are just essential for every person and attorney in particular. I won't work with attorneys unless they are familiar with those books, because it really outlines and reviews the research and case law on the topic. And if you don't have an attorney who's not well versed in that, it's going to be very hard to win a case. And so that's why I really tell everybody I work with, they have to get those books and they need to know them inside and out.
Right. So with your expertise, like what you do is you're the subject matter expert instead of so for parents to keep this in mind is that she's not going to go in and look at your personal situation and say, oh yes, there's parental alienation, or no, there's that's not what she's doing. She's going in and educate the court on what parental alienation looks like and what does it mean and things like that.
Yeah, and then it's up to the attorney and to connect the dots to the case. And then they'll often have, depending on the attorney, they'll have other experts maybe who have worked with the family. And they may or may not know as much about alienation, but their insights and experiences with the family are also useful. because then they can connect those dots to testimony like what I give. There's others like Dr. Bill Burnett does similar expert witness work. So there's other people who can do this kind of work. Psychlaw.net is a website. It's a forensic firm that does this kind of work, and they're also able to do some case specific type work where they can review materials and things. So there's other resources for parents I'm sure there's other people who do research in this area that could also probably testify, but we need more. We need more
Yeah.
people. We need a lot more.
That's the problem, is that I get so many parents contacting me and asking, like, who do I go to? And I only have a handful
Right.
of you to refer to. Like, I don't have more. It's like,
Right.
it's really, yeah, it's really unfortunate. And lawyers too, like you said, it's so important for the lawyers to be really knowledgeable in this. And a lot of lawyers don't.
Right.
I remember, so with my personal case, back then a few years ago, and by the way, I turned my case around, but the lawyer actually go, "Oh, so you have an estrangement situation," and
No.
I had
Yeah.
I didn't know what alienation means. I didn't know what estrangement means. Now that I look back, I'm going, "Oh my God, this guy had no idea," and
Mhm.
and it's so dangerous when you have that kind of people, that professionals that working in your case. So yeah, you really need to get the
Mhm.
right people.
Yeah, I always try to tell people, get a second opinion, even with you when you have an attorney. Like, so let's say you come up with a course of action. Try to, and if you have a good attorney, they're willing to get another opinion too, to see, hey, is there another way we can go about doing this? And there's a lot of very good attorneys who specialize in this area that are willing to consult on cases. Just, even an hour or two to look at your game plan and see if they have any other ideas of what might work. We do that for medical issues all the time, right? If you get diagnosed
Right,
with cancer or something like that, you usually get a second opinion.
right.
Because your life's at stake. I mean, well, your children's lives are at stake, and so's yours. So get a second opinion. So many people just kind of stick with attorneys because they kind of trust them and they believe that they're going to do the right thing. And some do, and some do the work, and some really try to understand and try to find the best way. But others, they maybe are too busy, or they don't care as much, or I don't know. So I think you really have to search around, and if you're going to invest that much money and time, and you only get a few shots at it at court, you got to go in knowing, I'm feeling confident that the way you're going at it is right. Yeah.
So that's the problem, is parents, when they first got into this, um, usually people are quite innocent. They don't realize the scope of this situation. They don't realize
Mm-hmm.
what's at stake.
Right.
And then they don't realize how outrageous the situation can be, like how they can be blamed for things that just completely, like,
Oh yeah.
impossible. Yeah,
Yeah.
and so that they don't realize. So that's the problem, is people not properly prepared up front, and then once they get in so deep and so deep and so deep, and then finally, and then it's kind of too late by that point.
Right.
And then they ran out of money. They ran out of,
Right.
like, they
Right.
lost so much by then. Yeah. Okay, so let's see. Claudia said, Dr. Hammond, how do you balance, and sorry, the question kind of ran away from my screen. So let's try something else. Fernando said, Ashish is the man. Yes, attorney Ashish Joshi. If you guys haven't seen our multiple interviews with him, you can check it out. He's really amazing when it comes to the principle of fighting with parental alienation in court. We also had an interview with him recently talking about tort claims, going after the alienators for damages. So check that out. Okay, Fernando said Dr. Miller kick ass. Yes, Dr. Steve Miller is amazing as well. We
Mhm.
also had a 3 hours interview with Dr. Miller that just went, it was so funny because when I contacted him, I said, could I have a 2 hours interview with you? And he said, oh no, there's no way that it will be that long,
Yeah.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
he
Once he
said,
gets going,
yeah, he said,
once he gets
I'll give you 90 minutes, right?
Yeah.
So we got on there, and 3 hours later, I'm like, wow, you okay? Yeah, no, he's amazing. He definitely, yeah. Okay, so Maura said, can we get the names of the books written in the comment, and how do I find your papers? Okay, so the book is called Parental Alienation, Science and Law. It's authored by a lot of experts in the field. I think there's 14 authors, including Dr. Harman here, but it's edited by Dr. Burnett and Dr. Lorendos. The other book is called Litigating Parental Alienation. It's by attorney Ashish Joshi. Claudia said both books are amazing. Predax said I was pro se. I did have one expert witness, and that ex-jackass lawyer kept interrupting and obstructing his testimony, and the Seattle judge allowed it. Yeah, that's the situation in court, is you just don't know how things going to play out. And
right. Yeah, that's one of the challenges, I think, of pro se is, and I understand the need to be pro se at times. We had to do it in my husband's case too. We didn't have the money to battle or fight one battle. Ultimately, we had to then wait a few years before we can afford to go back and do it again without doing it ourselves, just because no matter what my husband did, the court just interpreted everything as too combative.
wow.
And that they just said he was aggressive, even though he was just objecting to things. But that's the danger, right? Of there's lots of stereotypes of moms and dads, and in court, that's even more clear, especially when you have a very biased judge. And so even though it's really hard to afford representation, it's, there's advantages of it, because they can do things that there's no way you would be able to even try to do without getting in trouble with the court. So, and I always struggle too as an expert, because if you don't know how to enter into evidence and handle objections, the opposing counsel oftentimes will have all these objections to crazy things that, unless you know the law and different types of strategies, it's hard to kind of overcome their objections, right? And how to get certain things entered into evidence, and to, sometimes I'll be waiting on the stand for an hour while the lawyers argue about something ridiculous, about something that they're just trying to get into evidence. And I think as pro se, you're at a real disadvantage. And you do get a lot of leniencies, but it's so hard, it's so hard to battle that. This isn't an easy, well, we know it's not small claims court, right? It's not, it's a very technical part of the law. It's very,
right.
It's very challenging part of the law. And yeah, and I totally empathize with parents who have to be pro se, but I struggle with with being an expert on cases like that, though, because it can make me a very vulnerable witness. Because opposing counsel oftentimes will try to tear you down and destroy your reputation. So it makes it hard for them to be able to testify in other cases.
Right.
And unless I trust a lawyer that I've worked with or that I feel confident in, I often won't agree to a case, because I know that I need to be protected, just as much as, I want to do a good job and do the best I can, but I can't if the lawyer doesn't know what they're doing.
Right, right.
No.
Talking about stereotype, you have done work on stereotyping, like society expectation and perception of people based on gender, for example. What was some of those findings that you found when it comes to parental alienation?
I found a couple. I've done a few studies looking at attitudes towards parents who engage in parental alienating behaviors, as one study. So in that one, we asked parents we presented them with an example of a parent who would engage in a whole bunch of behaviors, and they had to rate how acceptable they thought it was for them to do those behaviors. Some people were told that that parent was a mother. Some were told it was a father, and other people weren't told any of that information. It's just, is it a parent doing these things? And even though the alienating behaviors that we had on the list were all pretty much rated as not very acceptable to do, when moms did them, they were rated as more acceptable. And it ties to the beliefs that moms can't do any wrong and that they must have some reason that they're engaging in those behaviors, and that when fathers do it, it's just an example of them being abusive. And so the same behaviors were rated very differently by the people who were judging them. We've also found, well, I have another paper that it's not about parental alienation, but it's under review right now. So I should hopefully be able to share it at some point soon. But we looked at how people judged parents who were working or more of a stay-at-home parent. And we manipulated whether it was a mother who was the full-time breadwinner or the father, and then the other parent was home. And then we looked at whether or not moms or dads would be punished if they were, in terms of custody and financially, when they were going through a divorce. And what's interesting is we found that when moms were the full-time breadwinner and dads were more the stay-at-home parent, that she wasn't as likely to get custody than as if she had been a stay-at-home parent. And dads, it didn't really matter. Sadly, they weren't likely to get custody either way. But we also found, though, that dads who chose to stay at home were given more debt, like more marital debt, than moms who did. So essentially they're kind of punished for not being the provider, right? And so that's some of the work I've done in that. And so, stereotypes are kind of all over the place, right? We see it everywhere across different court systems, but yeah.
Okay, you guys, so Josh posted the name of one of the book in the chat room. So if you guys have trouble looking up the title, he posted there. Rush said, hello, Dr. Harmon. We are having a really tough time with a court master. Firstly, what is a court master? And then how do we steer away from this master who seems to be taking our case personally and ignoring all the key facts and testimonials? We would like to deal with the judge who have been more objective. And I wanted to clarify that Dr. Harmon is not a lawyer, so this question may not be appropriate, but I wonder, do you have any comment on that?
I don't know. I think strategies on moving and changing, I don't know what a court, I think each state has different things. Here in Colorado, we call them magistrates. Probably other places are called court marshals. They're usually, I think, people appointed at the lower level kind of decision. They're appointed to make specific types of decisions in different cases, from what I gather. And judges make, more, they deal with a more variety of cases and larger kind of decisions, like divorce, for example. They have to usually decide a lot more than just custody, right? They're deciding how to split up finances and all sorts of things. So I'm not sure how to make changes of venue and things like that. You definitely want to get an attorney to help.
Right. So Claudia also helped writing the names of the two books in the chat room. So if you guys wanted to check that out. Julie said 4 lawyers later, none have done anything at all. Yeah, this is a situation that we see quite a lot with targeted parents, is that because there's such a lack of awareness and expertise in this field, that parents have trouble getting good lawyers. And then lawyers, when you go to them, of course they're going to say, yeah, I know what to do. Yeah, I'm very experienced, right? They're going to take your money, and then you got nothing. And then you're frustrated, and then you end up getting another lawyer, and then you end up with the same situation. And so with her case, she says 4 lawyers later, and then nothing got done. It's unfortunately that's the situation right now. Is we just don't have enough experts in the field in all aspects of the professional side of things, like lawyer, therapists, researchers, really anybody. We don't have enough. And considering the magnitude of the problem, how widespread it is, and how serious it is, the impact of it on the children and on the parents is really traumatic. And yet, we just don't have enough resources right now. Okay, Marlene said, do either of you have experience where anything to do with family court. Even the sight of a document triggers someone's PTSD from being raped as a child so intensely it puts them back in that moment and fully relives it, and then takes days to recover from going through being triggered. If so, or not, any advice? I know getting attorney would help, but that is triggering just the same, and it's so deafening. It is so defeating when it's obvious they don't truly hear you, either because they don't care or don't understand PTSD and or parental alienation on top of not being able to afford one. Okay, so she's talking about triggers, looking at documents, so court documents, and a trigger and sort of bring back flashback of childhood traumas.
Right. Mhm. Yeah. That's very common. I mean, Mandy Mathewson's research looks at a lot of the impact on parents and how it affects them, and trauma. It's not even just post-traumatic stress. You're dealing with ongoing traumatic stress, right? And so it's always raw. It's always there. It's not something in the past that you can just try to distance yourself from. I mean, there's constant reminders, and so the toll that it takes on people, just like any other kind of violence or aggression, it's huge, right? And this is why, I mean, I often have to explain whenever I testify in court that how this is domestic violence, and it's not just child abuse. And so the children are used as weapons against you, and so that that in and of itself is painful because you're watching your children live through that, but then you're the target of it at the same time. And so it's really difficult. Oftentimes I've seen, even I've spoken with Ashish Joshi about this, is the best cases he's ever worked on, or tend to be most successful, is when there's somebody else close to you who works with your evidence. Sometimes it's a step parent, right, who's there and isn't as close to it. I mean, they're close to it, obviously, but it's not as emotionally triggering for them as it is for the parent. Because sometimes parents, if you get an email in your inbox, you're like, like the last thing you want, or a phone call comes in and it's, no caller ID, and it could be CPS, and you're just like, you freak out. I've been there, so, the last thing you want to do is like to kind of keep reliving that. When you're having to go to court, you have to open up those documents and go through them, and it's awful. And so, I don't have any good advice. I'm saying you're not alone. It's very common to experience that, but, I think having other people to go through your stuff and help you pull out the evidence you need so that you don't have to keep reliving it and looking at it. I think, sometimes I've had my graduate students work on cases to help parents because it's too hard for them to read through all their emails and pull out, because the emails, I mean, I'm sure many of you watching, you get these nasty grams, right? You get these awful gaslighting emails, and you just can't even stomach reading it. I mean, because it's just hostile, and
Yeah.
For somebody else to read it, it's difficult, but at least if you have somebody else who's not as emotionally triggered by it, it helps. So I've had my grad students sometimes work on cases where if there isn't somebody else to do that for you, they're a lot less expensive than me. So they can take the time to do that.
Yeah, I've seen this a lot with parents about, the triggers. Like you said, sometimes just a text message notification, it just shut down. The parents would shut down and they won't touch their phone again for like a whole day, and they have to go and do something else to get themselves together, and like, oh, let's pull myself together to finally just read this text message.
Yep.
So yeah, that's very common. So we actually did an interview with Dr. Lynn Kosh from University of Arkansas about complex PTSD and trauma-informed therapy. So if you guys haven't seen that interview, check out that in our videos tab. And so we talk about this, and one of the ways of dealing with triggers that I found also helpful is to what they call reframing. I mean, what I call reframing is instead of like when you get a text message or something that triggering you, and you anticipate that that kind of things do come in, then you prepare yourself to say that, okay, if you get a text message, yeah, she or he is probably desperate now. He or she is probably in pain now, right? You reframe it in a way that is positive for you and empower you, so that when it come in, you can look at it and go, yeah, let's see, like this person is probably losing the battle, and the reason why they are trying to attacking me so badly is because they are losing. And if you have a different perspective of looking at triggers, and you knew that these are the things that are your triggers, so if you can anticipate and prepare for that, then it can also help. And then, yeah, obviously, like Dr. Harmon said, if you could get other people to help you dealing with certain things that is too much, and as always, right, having a support network, building a support network around you is so important in dealing with this, because this is so deep, this is so painful that, yeah, it could destroy you if you have to deal with this alone.
Yeah, I knew a parent who, great advice that he had received. It was about how to get control over it. I think he was getting about 50, 60 emails a day, just nasty grams and constant attacks. And then when he wouldn't respond, it would go to text. I mean, it was so bad, but somebody gave him some advice saying, hey, look, you can create a folder in your Gmail so that whenever it comes in, it goes right there and it doesn't go into your inbox. You don't even have to see it. And then once a week, or whenever you're ready, you have control over when you choose to see it. So that way it was completely not, it wasn't triggering him all the time, right? Because he could control when he wanted to open it up and read it, right? And so sometimes finding strategies like that can be really helpful. Yeah.
Right. Because that, like you said, it's about taking power back in your hands. So, you're in control. That's so important, get out of that victim place and take control of your situation. It's always one of the biggest way of dealing with this. Fernando says, so true, I'm on my third attorney. Amy said, what programs do you recommend to fix parental alienation after it is recognized or diagnosed? I assume you're talking about intervention and reunification, Amy. Yeah, what's your thought? I know you have done some evaluation of actually reunification programs.
Yeah. So the answer to that depends on how severe it is and what has been attempted in the past. And so one thing that the biggest hurdle, well, it's not as big in some parts of the world, like in Canada, courts have started taking judicial notice that it is child abuse, meaning you don't need somebody like me to go in and tell the court how bad it is. All they need to know is this pertinent in this case or not? And then, so that's a totally different thing. Whereas here, you still have to get them to see that this is severe child abuse, right? And it's severe when it becomes severe, right? It's severe alienation. And so the answer really depends on what's been tried. And in the book that I mentioned, the Parental Alienation, Science and Law, there's a fantastic chapter by Dr. Richard Warshak on intervention. And he describes best practices for mild, moderate, and severe. So I would actually refer anybody to that. I sometimes have parents reach out to me. In fact, I spoke with somebody today who wanted the Turning Points for Families program ordered. But they didn't really I don't think they had an understanding of what that meant, because the program is great, programs like that or Family Bridges. But I don't think people always understand that it just kickstarts the process. That the actual there's longer term intervention that has to be done on the other end. And you can't do that without court involvement. So you need a court order to do all of that. In fact, you can't even order programs like Turning Points for Families or Family Bridges, or there was a program called Family Reflections. You can't get that unless you have a court order for it. So, and one of the reasons, and even if you don't use one of those programs, you can still have effective intervention if you have like a team approach. to treatment. And so you would have, for example, Dr. Kelly Baker has a model that they have adapted and used from the Family Separation Clinic out of the UK. And they've modeled it and kind of tweaked it to fit here in the US. And it matches a lot of what Dr. Rick Warshak also describes as best practice. And what you have is essentially a team lead, a mental health team lead, who sort of serves as a role of sort of a GAL or a guardian ad litem, in that they're appointed by the court to be managing the case. It's kind of like a dependency and neglect or abuse type case, because it is, right? You're essentially treating it like that, where you have this person who's a court appointed team lead who has training and experience working with alienation cases, where they understand how alienators operate. They understand how they try to split providers and turn them against each other, or, just like they do in the family, right? They understand how manipulative they can be and how all of that. Then you have a family therapist who works with the alienated parent and the child or children. And then you have a therapist who works with the alienator. Then you have, if it's a very severe case, meaning really severe, like as in no contact, total refusal, all the manifestations of alienation that we see in children. In that case, there would be a transfer of custody and then a no contact period, just like you would with other kinds of abuse. Right? You need to protect the children from abusive behaviors of the alienating parent. And so that's the best approach. And because I think what a lot of people don't understand is therapists don't have authority to enforce court orders. So they can work with the family, they can identify alienations going on, but they can't go and, make a recommendation for custody. They can't go to, they're limited in their role. And it's very important. I know it can be very frustrating, but unless you know the limits of people's different roles, we can expect too much of them and get frustrated, right? And this is why kind of this model works very well, because you have a court-appointed person who is monitoring progress. And when it's not being made, they have regularly scheduled status conferences with the court, who has the authority to enforce an order. They don't, right? These therapists, they don't. They provide information to the court about how it's going, but and then they can make adjustments as needed. But they need that teeth of the court to be effective, right? Now that's a more structured intervention that you would do in more moderate to severe cases. In mild cases, you wouldn't. You have a lot more flexibility because it hasn't gotten that bad, right?
Right. Yeah, that's the thing, right? We're dealing with something that it's not just accidental. It's not like, oh, you accidentally like the child bumped into something and then got hurt. It's not like that. There's a malicious actions by the alienator that keep pounding onto the child. And so it's not just about treating the child and the targeted parent, but the alienators. How much control can you have on the alienators is a very important aspect. And that's why Dr. Harmon is talking about, you don't have the court order to somehow keep the alienators in check, and sometimes, separating the alienator completely from the child, then, there's not much you can do to help this bubble the child and the targeted parents. So
most importantly, the children. I've seen a lot of cases where there's court-ordered reunification and that's it. But when that happens, there's not a recognition of how it's gotten to that point, and looking at how the alienator, who typically still has custody of the children at that point, is going to undermine that progress no matter what. There's going to be no progress whatsoever. I talked to so many parents when I finally get pulled into cases where they've been in reunification therapy for a year and nothing's happened. It's like, because they're treating the wrong thing.
Right.
They're treating it like estrangement. They're treating it like reunification would happen if you were an abuser yourself.
Right.
That's that type of reunification that they're doing.
Yeah.
And that's not the problem. Like that's not they're treating the wrong problem, right?
Exactly. Yeah. So actually, in my case, I was auto reunification therapy. I had no idea what that was. We never mentioned the term parental alienation. And so I found a therapist, and then he had no idea what it was. And he looked at the children and he talked to the children and go, I don't understand. Like, why would you guys say this thing? It doesn't make sense. Like, he was just completely shocked. He's sitting
Yeah.
in this session and he just go, you guys, you're talking to my kids. And he's like, this doesn't make sense. This is not what why are you guys saying this thing? Like, does it even make sense to you? Like, he couldn't make sense. It was so crazy. And that's
Yeah, I've had some therapists reach out to me to consult more and more, which is great. They're consulting with me more and more on cases when they're running into that. They were doing reunification therapy, and 9 times out of 10 on the cases they worked on, that was the problem. It was estrangement, and they were doing reunification at work, but then they were coming across cases where it wasn't working at all and they couldn't figure it out. And then when I started talking, and then when I kind of explain and walk them through what alienation is, why it's different, why it doesn't work, and all this stuff, it was like a light bulb goes on their head and they're like, oh my God, I've been treating this all wrong. But the problem is people don't know what they don't know. And so unless they haven't read anything or they haven't gone to a training that actually has up-to-date research and information, especially trainings with like scientists and not just clinicians who have opinions about alienation, then, if you actually look at kind of the research evidence and all this stuff and can kind of understand the empirical basis of the 5-factor model, which is described in the book, or both books, I think they talk about it. Then the clinicians don't know, like they don't know like the limits of their knowledge. And so when they do learn it, they realize what they need to go and do, right?
right.
And I do have a lot of clinicians now who do email me. Anytime a new paper come out, they email me and ask for copies. And I keep their names because I'm like, you know what? You're conscientious. You're trying to stay up to date on the research, and I give you credit for that, so.
That's nice. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Really. So, yeah, when it comes to treatment, it's pretty complex. But I would say for parents, though, it starts from you. You need to be very educated yourself. Because, if you want to build the right team around you, you want to seek the right solution, it starts from you. So definitely.
Right. Like, for example, I've seen time and again, parents will tell me, and I know this even from close friends of mine who've been dealing with this. They go to a therapist, and in reunification therapy, what they'll often have kids do is make a list of all the problems that they have with the parent, right? And all the things that they're upset about and all this stuff. And then they go and read it to the parent in the therapy session. And then that parent's supposed to apologize. Now, if there was actually abuse and that parent did do things wrong, like neglected, left the kids at home when they went out and got drunk or something like that, it makes sense, right? You hear that it hurt the kids, you own up to it, but if you're being accused of all these things that are ridiculous or they're trivial and you have to sit there and take it and then apologize, and the therapist tells you need to do that because that's what the kids perceive and you need to work with that, they're completely missing the boat.
Right.
Completely enabling and the over empowerment of those children, and they're validating their alienation. And so parents need to know that when that happens, it's really sad though, because when they say to the counselor, I'm not going to do that. I didn't do those things, or this is totally unreasonable. And if it's a court-ordered thing, then it's used against them because then they're told that they're not complying with treatment.
Yeah,
that they're getting the wrong treatment. And so sometimes parents in a double bind, right? Because you're getting the wrong treatment, it's making it worse. But yet, if you don't keep going, you're told that it's your fault.
Yeah, you're in contempt. You're in contempt of court.
Right. And so this is where you really need to have, if it's court ordered like that, really need to have an attorney who says this is not the right therapy, right? And like, I don't know what you would do. You'd have to get some advice on that. But if it's the wrong therapy, it should be discontinued immediately because it's just going to hurt the children. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, actually, one of the big goal in the right therapy is to reverse the power hierarchy that has been it's been upside down in that relationship. The children have been inappropriately empowered by the alienators to disrespect the targeted parents.
Yep.
And that's why the children feel it's okay to be rude and cold and ignore you and not appreciate you. So if the therapists don't understand this and they then empower the children further, then things can be really a lot worse. And their role really have to reverse that to make the children feel remorseful for their behavior and, appropriately appreciate the targeted parents.
Yes.
Okay, so Paul said, if the child is now 21 years old, kept from me since she was 13. Oh my God, I'm sorry. And brainwashed to hate and fear me. All attempt to contact the child runs to in total fear. Is the only resource to wait for the 21 years old to grow up and figure it out. I've spent over $250,000 fighting for her and all professional in my favor. Last time she spoke to me was in 2013 before all this daughter had a perfect life with no problem in the family. Okay, should he just sit there and wait for the child to grow up? Well, the child is 21.
Right. It's really hard when they're an adult because you don't have any authority, right? You can't, courts have no authority over them at that point. I know Dr. Amy Baker's published a few good books on for parents on how to deal with it. And I think she even has one on how to deal with it when they're adults. And that might be a good resource to get some questions. I don't have a good answer for that one. Most of my involvement is working with families where the children are still minors. So I can't answer that. I mean, you can hope, I hate saying hope that they're going to come around, but we know that that doesn't always happen, right? And so that I think that's bad advice to give to parents, but I have seen, there are a lot of stories of children kind of sometimes figuring it out. Sadly, they sometimes figure it out too late, or when they have their own children and then they become alienated, that's when it hits them, which is horrible to sit back and watch, right? But I don't know. I mean, I think Dr. Baker has some good suggestions and ideas on what you can do. So it might be good to bring her on, bring her on your show.
Yes, we have interviewed Dr. Amy Baker at least twice now. So if you guys want to check out her interview, we also interviewed Dr. Joshua Coleman, who talks specifically, like our interview of him was specifically on this topic, is how do you recover adult alienated children? So children don't just grow up and then by age, like age is not a factor that make them wake up to the alienation. I have been doing some research on this particular topic, and I interview a lot of these adult children of parental alienation, and what wakes them up is not age. There are specific circumstances that make them wake up. For example, like Dr. Harman mentioned, is if the child themselves become the alienated parents, then that's when they really live that experience and go, oh my God, this is what happened to me. So sitting around is not the way to do it, but definitely watch the interview with Dr. Joshua Coleman that we had in the video tab, and he talked about strategy of reaching out to the children.
I know the book I was thinking about that Amy Baker wrote, Dr. Baker, it's called Breaking the Ties That Bind. It's a great book. It's based on interviews she did with young adults who were alienated children and kind of going through their experience of what happened to them and what were the turning points for them. And I think it's useful because for a lot of them, it was very different, right? And there is no one formula of how they kind of, and then she asked them questions like, what could the targeted or what could the alienating parent have done? Could they have done anything at all? And it varied by each person. So I don't think there's one straight answer. But I think it's a useful book to read because I think it gives you some insight into maybe some things that maybe would help, in your situation if it sounds like a similar dynamic that what you had,
Right. So you guys check out Dr. Amy Baker's book and check out her interview that we have done with her. You okay? The other things that I would say is that reunification has a lot to do with you as well. So sometimes the child will wake up and reconnect with you And if the parents are not fully prepared, because it's not going to be easy, it's not smooth sailing. This has been a lot of trauma. It's very emotionally charged. There's have already a lot of brainwashing and misunderstanding. So if you are not prepared to open your arms and take your child in without judgment and fill the child with love and reconnect that relationship and pick up on your communication skills, then you're not going to be able to reunite with your children properly. So again, work on yourself. That's always a very big aspect of it. It's not just it's not like, oh, now you get to talk to the child and that's happily ever after. That's just the beginning. It's not the end. Okay. There's a lot of different short question. Sarah said, how does a pro se litigant study the strategies? Sarah, if you're talking about legal stuff, I would say that I think check out our interviews with other lawyers, because Dr. Harmon's not a lawyer. I think if you guys are not familiar, her work is she's a researcher in the field of parental alienation. So if you wanted information on parental alienation from a scientific perspective, that's the kind of question that we will pick up. But when it comes to fighting parental alienation in courts, check out our other interviews of a number of lawyers that we have interviewed. Okay, Craig said, where can I go to learn to sue my ex for alienating my daughter from me? Craig, so we did an interview with attorney Ashish Joshi on the tort claim. So check out that video in our videos tab on Facebook, and you will see that interview where he talked about, where, when, how, what, whom, that kind of things. Okay. There's some spam in the chat room. I hope you guys don't click on those spam link. It seemed obvious, so hopefully you don't click on it. Claudia said, do parents need to be proactive in getting law changes to recognize parental alienation?
We do. I mean, so what we're up against right now is, what's interesting is that the more research is accelerated. I have a paper under review where we reviewed what we know about it, where's the scientific evidence for it. And there's been a dramatic acceleration in studies that have been published in multiple languages. I think we counted 10 languages, like Brazil, Czech, all over, Sweden, French. And there's been, we counted in this paper, I think 40% of the studies that have been published in the last 4 years. So there's been a huge acceleration in research, not just mine, but in others, right? Other people's labs. But coinciding with that has been an increase that Dr. Bill Burnett found of misinformation that's being spread about parental alienation. I don't think that's a coincidence. The more advances we get, the more scientific denial we're getting. And we see that the people who are doing that are often the advocates for domestic violence advocates and children, advocates for children who have been trying to push a very strong paradigm about gender and violence, that only men can be abusive and that alienation is only something that men say to get out of abuse claims. They've gone around saying there is no scientific evidence for parental alienation, like absolutely none. They say that alienation has been debunked and that it's junk science. And they're not just saying this. They are writing letters, they've organized, they've passed laws in other countries where people can't even go and enter parental alienation into their cases anymore. They're trying to get rid of the law in Brazil. Anybody who speaks up about it, they're being attacked on social media by these groups, and they're called protectors of pedophiles. I mean, they're engaging in some really horrible attacks. I'm being attacked by many people, including, what's that?
Personally, you're being personally attacked.
Oh, just ad hominem attacks, like things that aren't even true, but nobody knows, right? And there is no public forum for debate. And you don't even debate people like that. I mean, I publish in top scientific journals. My critics publish in professional journals that don't publish science, and they don't understand science, or they publish on blogs. And they just criticize and attack and make false statements and spread misinformation. And they are influencing laws all over the country. They've been pushing laws to try to make it where parental alienation is not admissible in court. So they're trying to not even allow you to talk about it in court and take away all judicial discretion. The court is supposed to be the gateway or the gatekeepers of whether something is scientific or not, or something that's accepted or not. And they've been doing that. And parental alienation has been accepted. Dr. Lorando's published a paper where it's found to be important in court cases, probative, or, essentially useful to understanding a case, and reliable. The scientific evidence is reliable in like thousands of cases across the country. And so as a consequence, the people who've been denying parental alienation have organized to make it where there's a law so you can't even get it in, because courts have been accepting it. And so their workaround is to change law. And we really need people to stand up and prevent that from happening. Otherwise, you will have no protection in court anymore. You won't have no one will believe, you won't even be able to talk about being alienated, because they'll say it's not a scientific theory, even though it's ridiculous. I publish in some of the best psychology journals out there, and there's lots of other people who are publishing in really good psychology journals, and clinical journals and law journals. And so it's not true, but yet they're manipulating people and scaring people into passing laws and that are not based on truth and not based on actual research. And it's part of a larger problem right now. There's a lot of people who I think don't understand science. And so some of these people are trying to manipulate things. So people who don't know science don't know the difference, right? They don't know that what they're being told is incorrect. And so I think it's really important when you see some local activism going on to prevent laws or to try to change laws for the better, to get involved, because you need voices like you to go to these hearings and to talk about your experience, or to lend support for different things, because the detractors are doing that.
Yeah, we need a lot more advocates. So, and there's no better advocates than you who have gone through this, who are going through this. You truly understand. So definitely, parents, if you could, it's definitely highly recommended that you're active in advocating. I saw a question in the chat room about whether parental alienation is domestic violence, and I wanted to share with you guys a paper by Dr. Harmon. And this is like to me, it's a very important paper for you guys to check out. It's this paper here. It's called Parental Alienating Behaviors and an Unacknowledged Form of Family Violence. Be prepared, like if you guys are planning to read this, really block out some time, have your TV off, have your phone off, but it's really in depth, and she goes into so many aspects of why this is domestic violence and why it is child abuse. So many aspects of it, and like when you like seriously, this is like I spend so many hours trying to go through this paper. It's intense. So for example here, gaslighting, there's exploitation, vulnerability, exploitation, there's control of sexual health, threat of physical and sexual violence. I mean, there's so many aspects of it. Anyway, so when you go to the end and you look at how many papers that she has reviewed to work research on this paper, like there's like hundreds of scientific publication that she reviewed in order to work on this paper here. So just look at this. This is just the list of all the papers that she reviews.
What's
So
interesting is that paper was published. So Psychological Bulletin is one of the top psychology journals in the world. And it's published by the APA, American Psychological Association. When people say it's not scientific, and attorneys ask me about that when I'm testifying, I just, sadly, and I don't mean this, I laugh because I'm like, are you kidding me? Like, if it's not scientific, why am I publishing in scientific journals? And scientific journals recognize this. Where you're getting the most opposition are professional journals that are run by clinicians and lawyers. That should tell you something, right? And so this paper is, Psychological Bulletin. But, I've published in other journals too, like Current Directions in Psych Science, Current Opinion in Psychology, which is the paper you mentioned earlier about losses, that I published with Mandy Mathewson and Amy Baker. This work is getting into really good science journals. And so know that when you're dealing with people who are out there saying it's not scientific, because it's not true. It's like people who say climate change isn't happening, right? Or people who say that HIV and AIDS is just a conspiracy. I mean, there's so much science denial around the world about lots of things, and this is one of them. And so we're seeing it all over the place. And that paper was published in 2018. As I mentioned, we have another paper under review, and there's been dozens more studies published since then.
right. And I mean, honestly, if you think back, how long did it take for people to recognize that smoking can cause lung cancer?
Oh, yeah. Well, it's funny because scientists were making those connections. But you know why nobody else did is because there was an intense lobby group to make everybody doubt that science. That's exactly what's happening here.
Right.
Exactly. There's a large lobby advocating to keep money and not acknowledge that parental alienation is real. There's a lot of money invested in doing that. That's what we're up against. So,
Right.
yeah.
How are we doing with timeline? Do you have some more minutes? I don't want to hold
I
you.
could do a few more minutes. Yeah.
Okay.
About,
Let's see. I'm gonna try to see if we can pick some good one. Amy said, I feel like I'm educating the psychologist. I'm sending him links, emails, etc., and I'm not sure how to go about telling this therapist that he needs to learn and do research. I'm sorry. Yeah, it's really terrible because when therapists don't know this, and then you,
That's frustrating. So if anybody's ever interested in organizing a conference, or not a conference, but I get requests sometimes, and I know some people who do some fantastic trainings who can go to you as long as there's like 15 to 20 therapists that you can pull together who want to learn how to treat this effectively. We can do that. We can help organize and get people to you. The question is just, we can't be everywhere at once, right? And a lot of people live in places where there's nobody who has any specialization, but that can be fixed. But the problem is we need help in contacting people that to see if they'd be interested and if they'd want to do it. And so if you have a close network with people in your community where you're able to organize something like that, you could easily facilitate. And then you'll have other people in your area who have expertise. The hardest part is reaching those folks, because a lot of people are in private practice and they maybe go to APA and get training, continuing ed credits that way. But the way that they continue with their training and education, it's variable, right? They can kind of do whatever they want in terms of where they want to get their extra training and updates to training.
right.
So,
Yeah. Marlena said, I realized that my bio mom was alienated by my stepmom when my bio mom died, and she then show up. I guess he is a stepmom, then show up helping my ex text my daughter and cut all contact with me as a daughter's for 33 years off overnight. Yeah. Yeah, it sounds like a stepmom that have gone out of her way to really alienate you in multiple generations. Lisa said, never give up hope. My daughter is home and healing after a 4-year court battle. I, at one point, was totally hopeless. At one point, and in a space of waiting till she was 18, but miracles happen. So hope is hold on, pain ends. Very, very good message. Thank you. Stacy said, my older children and I did reunification therapy for 13 months before my children were returned to me. I had to apologize for something I didn't do.
Yeah.
Because she was advised by the reunification therapist. My children therapist was brought in 11 months after we were kept from me and testified at our evidentiary hearing that my children was being psychological. So she got a new therapist who then testified that the children were psychologically abused and basically in a cult. Yeah. Then after trial, our reunification therapist said to me that if the children therapist was involved sooner, I would have had the children back sooner. Yeah, I mean, the sooner you have the right professionals in your case, the sooner you have a chance of fixing your situation.
Right.
Talking about cult, we had an interview with Dr. Yana Lalich, where we talk about how parental alienation is very much like a cult, and she's a cult expert. So we talk a lot about cult culture and how does it look like and what does it take to recover your child from a cult. So if you guys haven't seen that interview, again, check out that interview. Stephen said, thank you, Dr. Harmon, amazing research. Mia said, Jeff said, Dr. Harmon, I've learned quite a bit by watching your YouTube videos, including the ones that you contributed to, but I found that Dr. Chudras' explanation makes sense to me and seemed directly relate to my observation with my ex-wife being rejected by my children. What do you think of his ideas and presentation?
I don't know. I think he's got some great ideas. I mean, but I often, my opinions are based on research and whatnot. And so I acknowledge and recognize, in fact, I even cited some of his work in one of my papers, and the need for testing theories, because courts aren't going to accept just theories when you go to court. They need empirical evidence and scientific evidence to admit testimony really on on the type of, testimony that I give. And so, I think there's a lot of great people doing great work and a lot of clinicians with great ideas and whatnot and things that they're seeing in practice. Obviously I base my research and my opinions on what's been published in scientific journals, like what you saw in my Psych Bulletin paper. I have to cite original scientific papers, not a book or, in fact, even in my field, books themselves generally aren't something that is valued.
Right.
It's got to be a peer-reviewed scientific journal, essentially, for me to publish in other peer-reviewed scientific journals. I can't cite things that aren't that.
Right.
Because in science, you build on science. You have to build on empirical evidence. And that's just kind of the way science works. It accumulates and it builds on the empirical work of others. Opinions are great and clinical opinions and whatnot, because people are reporting on things that they're seeing and they're reporting and tying it to other theories. But that's only one, that's one way of knowing. And, it's a valid way of knowing. My opinion's different. So
I would say that so sometimes you can hear things that are people opinions and they could be very experienced clinically, but when you follow and sometimes it seems to resonate with you really well, but when you have somebody and if you follow someone that have not done work that are peer reviewed, then you are at a risk of, especially in court, is that it put you in a weak position because the opposition, the opposing counsel can really, because you have a weak argument, it's not scientifically sound. So for scientific work, like Dr. Hammond's talk about, it has to be peer reviewed. So you can't use opinion. So that's the risk of that. And I do understand. And for me personally, I also found that sometimes opinions can seem resonates with you emotionally so well. But unfortunately, we really need to find, and that's why for us here, when we do events, you guys notice we very much focus on very scientific stuff. And sometimes we bring in other people from the field, but those are the people that have proven to have win cases, both the
Mhm.
federal level and the state level. So we vet our speakers really carefully because of
I mean,
that.
I should mention too that sometimes, scientific work has been pinned as something that's in competition with opinions of people such as Dr. Childress and others. And I don't think that that's an accurate way of depicting any of this. I think, a lot of myself and my colleagues, we recognize the work of each other, right? And we think, I value different opinions. I think our detractors or people who are denying parental alienation like to make it look like we don't acknowledge other people or entertain other ideas, and that's just simply not true. And so, but I'm always interested in kind of hearing different perspectives, and I work and do research with clinicians, right? And because they have different perspectives on the world, but I still, before I form an opinion, I also still have to base it on empirical, scientifically peer-reviewed, good quality research. And so the ideas of other people kind of help inform some of the ideas that I have, but that's not enough for the kind of work that I do. That's just one level of knowledge. And I believe, in my opinion, I need to do more than that to be successful in my career. Clinicians have different expectations and different standards of practice. Mine's different. I'm a scientist. I'm a professor. I'm not a clinician. I'm not a custody evaluator. I'm none of those things. I don't want to be any of those things. I'm not a lawyer. I don't want to be a lawyer, right? I'm a scientist. So I approach and do my work differently than clinicians do.
I see in the chat room, there's a few people that mentioned about the children for tomorrow. There's a symposium on Friday, so I am going to be one of the speakers on Friday. It's a continuing education. Like you can get continuing education credits. So if you guys, and for parents, and it's free too, so parents can enjoy that as well. So if you guys want to check that out. I think we're out of time, so I don't want to kind of keep her too long. I promised her to keep her earlier now, and it's already over time. There's this comment about how CPS really don't understand anything about parental alienation, and that's unfortunately it's not just CPS, right? We're looking at this whole entire system that lack of awareness at all levels. Court judges, lawyers, therapists, CPS, just really everybody. It's very, like you have to struggle to find people that understand it, and that's the unfortunate things. The other things is that when it comes to, because it's psychological abuse, as a society, we have a bias toward physical abuse because it's visible. You can see the bruise, you can, there's a hits and things like that. But when it comes to psychological abuse, it's much harder for people to pinpoint, so they tend to just not deal with it. And so the system don't have the right resources and tools to deal with that. And that's unfortunately,
right. Yeah. I mean, one thing that I and many other people argue, in our work is that when it becomes severe, parental alienation becomes severe, it does warrant a child protection response. And so the appropriate place for that would be CPS. However, I say that, and that's something Edward Crook has also argued in many of his papers, and he's a social worker out of Canada. But the issue is, a lot of times CPS won't intervene when it's psychological abuse. I mean, I've had many discussions even with my local CPS office, and they acknowledge it's a problem, but they don't have, even the director at the time admitted to me, I don't have the resources to do it, to track psychological abuse. It's a long-term thing, and they don't have the capacity. They get a call, they investigate, they close the case. They have turnover of workers constantly who have very little training. And then, it's a very dysfunctional system. I mean, something needs to happen at CPS in general. They have a really hard time keeping employees long. They're not paid well. They're undereducated, undertrained. It's a stressful job. Who wants to do all that for no money and not have the skills to do it right?
Right.
I mean, I empathize. However, unfortunately, the families' lives are in their hands, and so I don't know the solution to it. I mean, you'd want to, I mean, I know the gut instinct is burn it all down and start over, but I don't think we can do that, right? We can't do that. We can't. So I think, I've tried to approach CPS. I've tried to offer trainings, and they've told me, no, we've got this. We understand it. I'm like, no, you clearly don't, because I go to court and I'm testifying on the other side against you all the time. No, and I've even tried to send stuff to them. I've offered to come in and do free trainings. I've tried to offer free training for them to come to. They won't come.
Oh, wow.
And so it's frustrating, and I don't know where the resistance is coming from on that. I don't know, but it's not for lack of trying.
So Claudia and I actually had meetings with CPS in Texas, and we actually kind of demanded them to explain what is the procedure for dealing with psychological abuse and parental alienation. And we try to push that, parental alienation is child abuse and psychological abuse, and they kind of just running around and they couldn't explain it and they couldn't have a process. And they're like, well, let us find a lawyer so that the lawyer can talk to you guys, because after a while they got so scared of how we pushed and pushed and pushed. So what we are working on right now actually is we have a sponsor who is a politician. So it has to be a politician who is the chair of a committee. So in Texas, so we have a sponsor who is going to help us send a letter that demand the child protective agencies to clarify if they recognize that parental alienation is child abuse. So that's what we're working on right now. So Claudia, you guys see Claudia in the chat room. She's a very strong advocate. I'm so grateful for her to have her on my side. But
Awesome.
that's one of the things that we are working on right now. But yes, unfortunately, they are not equipped, they're not knowledgeable, and we don't have solutions there yet.
Right.
But Dr. Harmon, thank you so much for being here. I'm so grateful. Is there any parting thoughts for parents?
Oh, all I can say is I've been doing this work now for 10 years, because I switched my research focus about 10 years ago, and a lot has changed. We know a lot more about the problem. We know a lot more about what is effective to deal with it. Now what we're dealing with are the obstacles that are preventing that from happening, because there's a lot of people invested in not having this change. But I think that should be a note of optimism that we're making progress. It's going to get worse before it gets better, but what it means is that we are making progress. And so I think if there's any takeaway, it's that we got to, keep pushing forward and keep banding together and defend each other, right? And stand up for each other as we do this, and know that everybody has a different role. When I came into this, I remember I was being attacked online, even by alienated parents, saying, why are you doing research? We don't need any more research. We just need to change this. We just need to do this. We just need to do this. And I'm like, okay, that's for you to do. I'm a scientist. I'm going to contribute in my own way. And by doing the research I'm doing, it's helping it make it easier for you, right? And the work that you all do makes it easier for me to do work that I do, right? And so I think we all just need to respect the roles that we can play and what we can do, and not undervalue what we do. Don't undervalue the advocacy work of people. Don't undervalue the research. Don't undervalue the clinical work of people who get this stuff, right? Help defend them and stand up for them when they're doing the right thing, and don't leave them hanging, right? So that's my takeaway, because I think we're making a lot of progress, and we're pushing a boulder up a hill, and we need everybody, all hands on deck, to get it over the top. And it's going to get harder before it gets better. So
thank you so much. I mean, we are so grateful for your work, really. And then for parents in the chat room, I know that there's a lot of questions that we have not picked up. Again, just like the past interview that we did that I found was really helpful, is if there are maybe 2 or 3 parents that could please volunteer to go through the list of the questions in the chat room and pick out the 5 best questions that not yet addressed. And then if you could, if I can have a few parents that volunteer for that, I would really appreciate it. Then we can pick that 5 question and I can send a follow-up email with Dr. Harmon, and hopefully we can address those. So if you wanted to volunteer, please just comment in the chat room, and I would really appreciate that. If you're not already signed up for our mailing list on our website, victim2hero.com, please sign up for our mailing list. And also we have a book club that's coming up. So, this is for you guys to join as a group, and we would read together. And actually the paper that we're going to read, actually Dr. Harmon's paper that I just showed you guys, where we talk about parental alienation is domestic violence. So, and what we do with the book club is we read it and we're going to discuss it, and then we're going to share the finding with everyone as well. So if you guys want to join the book club, also comment in the chat room, and enjoy the rest of your evening wherever you are. And thank you so much for being a part of this. Please share, please like, and we really appreciate you, and stay strong. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Petra. Thanks for all the work you do.
Thank you.